Imagine waking up to find the world utterly empty. No messages, no voices, and no sign of life. Streets are silent, buildings abandoned, and every city lies lifeless. You are the last human on Earth. Now what? Where do you go and how long can you survive? On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're looking at what life would really be like if you were the last person on Earth. Let's start with your first few days alone. After the crushing existential realization that you're the last living person on Earth begins to fade, there are a few essentials you'll need to sort out. But first, you might indulge a little. With civilization gone, there's no one to stop you. Want to take a supercar for a joyride through the empty city? Go ahead! Feel like raiding luxury stores for gourmet food and designer clothes? You do you. With no laws, no job, and no one to answer to, the world is yours. In the early days, survival might feel like an afterthought, because for the first time ever, you're actually free. Maybe you've got wanderlust and you want to see the world. Technically, you could go anywhere. Well, any destination within walking or driving distance at least, but anything farther, that's likely out of reach. Unless you happen to have a pilot's license lying around. You could go on hikes for days at a time, move into the White House or a European castle, take up gardening, learn to play an instrument, or read all those books you've been meaning to get around to. It's hard to deny how appealing it would be to never need to worry about checking the news or being constrained by material factors like money. You could even walk around naked. Come on, it's not as if you wouldn't try it at least once. Okay, got that out of your system? Good, because it's about to dawn on you in a big way just how much trouble you're in. You need 3 essentials for continued survival: food, clean drinking water, and shelter, and those are the bare minimum. So let's start with securing a food source. Depending on where you are in the world, access to fresh food is going to vary. In a city, there's likely to be more of an abundance of things to eat, which could essentially be gathered up from the restaurants and supermarkets. Of course, there's bound to be a limit to what one person can carry, or even just fit into a vehicle, but you're likely not to run out of food straight away. The bigger problem here is that not everything keeps forever. Most food products come with an expiry date, and typically the fresher something is, the sooner it needs to be consumed. Produce, like fruits and vegetables, are likely to be the first to go, especially anything that's imported from overseas, like bananas or mangoes. You could try to enjoy those first, but a large intake of anything is a bad time for the body. Eating a lot of fruit can provide a lot of essential nutrients and even reduce the risk of some chronic illnesses, but a diet of nothing but fruit can be as harmful as none at all. While low in fat, salt, and not containing cholesterol, overconsumption of the natural sugars in fruits can lead to spikes in blood sugar, weight gain, and potentially digestive issues. And remember, nobody's making toilet paper anymore, so it's best to err on the side of caution. Eat a moderate amount and consider saving the seeds to grow more fruits and vegetables. Even the leftovers you don't eat can be turned into compost, helping you to build a sustainable food source. Supermarkets would also have an abundance of canned or frozen food that'll keep a lot longer. We'll highlight a potential pitfall with frozen goods in a moment, but stocking up on the canned stuff like a good little doomsday prepper is definitely advisable. Of course, if you're living out in the sticks, things will play out a little differently. In areas that rely directly on farms for crops and livestock, keeping everything running without help quickly becomes a full-time job. Living off the land is still a viable option if you're up for the challenge, but managing a farm, along with the threat of predators, is likely to burn through another of your key resources: water. So let's talk water, because without it, you are done for. Nearly every system in your body relies on water to function properly. It's not just about being a hydro homie, it's about how the cells get oxygen and nutrients, and how your kidneys flush out waste, how minerals are broken down for absorption, and how your body regulates temperature. And that becomes important when the real problems start coming down the pipeline. Water treatment centers and pumping stations wouldn't have anyone around to operate them, meaning running water wouldn't last long. Any fresh water kept in reservoirs, or even in the water tanks of individual buildings, would eventually go stale. While you're gathering food from the supermarkets, you need to make sure you get your hands on as much bottled water as possible. After all, there would be thousands of liters ready to go. And remember, you don't just rely on water just for drinking. Without other people around, there would be no electricity, which in turn means you would have limited options when it came to heating water for bathing or cooking. Sure, it wouldn't be impossible, but it would mean going old school, heating water over an open fire. But another big risk would come from not having access to purified water. If you don't learn how to properly sanitize your water, you are setting yourself up for some potentially deadly waterborne illnesses, including typhoid, cholera, and a whole host of gut-wrenching infections that you really don't want to meet. You could boil or filter your water to prevent drinking down any potential nasties, But you do need to know how to do that. With no one else around, there's not going to be internet access, especially if the power grids start failing, and we'll get to that soon. You'll be relying on your own knowledge and any survival books you could find, and well, whatever you remember from that one weekend you binge-watched Bear Grylls. Speaking of which, living on a steady supply of purified bottled water, as well as a balance of long-life food and freshly grown produce, are just the first two basics of survival. If you want to see out the rest of your isolated experience, then you're gonna need a sturdy roof over your head. Regardless of whether you're in a city or a more rural area, there is likely to be an abundance of empty places that you could shack up. You wouldn't even have to settle for a shack. Before you sprint toward the nearest mansion or top-floor penthouse, remember, you're living in a world completely void of human life. And there are a few things you really need to consider first. Maintaining your new home is going to be a top priority, and the bigger the space you choose, the more work it's going to be. Not to mention the power consumption is always going to be higher in larger homes. Most buildings deteriorate quickly without regular maintenance, especially when exposed to the elements. Nature won't slow down just because humans are gone. Without repairs after floods, storms, or other natural disasters, many areas will become unlivable as nature rapidly reclaims the land. Even the strongest structures we've built are no match for the elements. Rain is a big one, as it only takes a hole around 18 inches wide to let in enough rainwater to collapse an entire standing structure within a decade. If all other humans suddenly disappeared, then you'll need to keep a close eye on your chosen survival home on top of keeping yourself alive. Any houses constructed of wood would gradually start to rot, especially if rainwater was able to breach a structure. And that doesn't mean other structures are any more secure either. Without human beings to cut down trees and keep vegetation under control, these plants risk encroaching on spaces that they would have previously been kept out of. Some would start to grow their way through concrete, or the roots of larger plants could reach deep enough to disrupt the foundations of buildings or uproot roads. Adverse weather could also erode concrete structures, leading to their eventual collapse, and high winds or intense storms could easily make light work of glass. As well as needing it to survive, you would also be working against any excess water created by storms. Even a mild flood would be enough to cause untold damage to a significant number of buildings. If any basements were filled with soil and water, it would allow rot and mold to spread, making any affected structures dangerous to inhabit. In colder parts of the world, with heating options for homes now limited to open fires, pipes would eventually freeze and burst, potentially leading to even more damage. And without the aid of fire services, all it would take would be one bolt of lightning to start a citywide fire. Nature's takeover of cities wouldn't just come from above, it would rise from below too. In cities with public transportation systems, underground tunnels would begin to flood fast. Within 36 hours, many subway systems could be completely submerged. And while trains may no longer be running, commuters weren't the only regulars underground. Rats, by the thousands, would be forced to the surface, driven out of the flooding tunnels and pipes. And if they overrun the city, you could kiss a lot of your remaining food supplies goodbye. But vermin might not be the only new neighbors. Without human keepers, zoo animals would eventually escape, and the streets could become home to creatures far more dangerous than pigeons and stray cats. Now, you might think that the smart play in this situation would be to head out to the countryside and avoid those potential dangers. But not only will you face the same maintenance troubles in keeping your shelter secure against the elements, there would still likely be dangerous animals out there. Depending on where you are in the world, you'd likely have to contend with wild dogs, bears, wolves, and other non-domesticated predators. And outside of the cities, the threat doesn't disappear, it doubles down. Unless you're a seasoned survivalist who knows how to deter or take on dangerous animals, your odds of surviving in the wild are not great. And let's be real, you're unlikely to make it out by punching a bear in the face. Despite all odds, you've managed to make it a few months. Good job! By keeping close enough to the city, you can reach it on foot while staying far enough away to avoid the worst of the environmental damage. Things are so far looking good. At first, you've scavenged fuel from abandoned cars and gas stations, using whatever compatible gasoline you could find to keep a vehicle running. But after flipping through a car maintenance book, you realized most of that fuel would go stale within 2 years. So you made a call. Vehicles couldn't be your main mode of transport, at least not for short trips into the city and back to your survivalist home. Not only would they become unreliable, you'd also need a quick, ready-to-go escape option in case of an emergency. Over time, you've made it a priority to collect any books that might actually be useful. And as much as you'd love to kick back with a holiday romance or a spy thriller, there is no time for leisure reading unless it teaches you something practical. So that Twilight series can go straight to the trash. But you've got a lot of time on your hands and you are expanding your knowledge. You've reached a point where you can survive effectively on your own, even if shaking off more traditional ideas of fun hasn't been easy. Meanwhile, the world outside has been gradually getting more unrecognizable each day. After severe downpours come floods that then turn roads into rivers, while even the tallest buildings around start succumbing to corrosion. There's still just shy of 100 years before all the dams overflow and collapse, so at least that's one less thing to worry about. You've also made it a habit to closely track any animals you encounter, especially where dangerous predators tend to hunt. Domesticated animals are pretty rare now. Most livestock, pigs, cows, and chickens were left to fend for themselves when humans vanished, making them easy prey. Those that couldn't adapt to living in the wild were hunted and killed off, or outpaced in the race for food. You rarely have issues with foxes, but wolves and even groups of lions, tigers, and other large wildcats from zoos are significantly more dangerous. When it comes to practical challenges, a few have forced you to adapt fast, starting with staying warm. That one was relatively easy to manage. You built a fire pit for open flames and stockpiled as many blankets and winter clothes as you could find. But like everything else, keeping warm has been made harder by the loss of two modern essentials that vanished along with everyone else: electricity and the internet. While you might think that being the last person alive would mean that you have access to all the world's power, but the infrastructure required to keep the electrical grids running would require more maintenance than just one person could manage. Most power plants require human operators to monitor them. Without this oversight, these plants would shut down in a few days, maybe a few weeks at the most. The power grids themselves rely on a delicate balance of human demand for electricity and the output to supply that demand. Without humans being around to maintain those essential systems, grids would become unstable, leading to widespread outages. Sure, you've become an amateur survivalist, but you are not about to cosplay as a power plant technician. And while there is a much bigger risk tied to those power plants, we'll get to that in a minute, let's talk about what no electricity actually means for the last human on Earth. This would have huge knock-on effects, one that you would be able to at least find a workaround for, and the other you wouldn't. Let's start with the latter. No power simply means no internet. The infrastructure needed to keep the World Wide Web up and running and accessible requires constant power and cooling. If nobody's around to stop those cooling systems from failing, the subsequent overheating at data centers would cause them to shut down. The same goes for the devices that we use to access the internet. Routers, servers, and other critical equipment would all shut down without power. The internet itself might limp along for a few days, maybe even weeks, but once the power goes, so does everything else. So say goodbye to the sum of total human knowledge and all of our precious, precious memes. Another thing that would also be affected by outages would be food preservation. You wouldn't be able to electronically freeze anything to make it last longer or even refrigerate it without power. Freezing food using the elements could work, though you would need low enough temperatures in order to make that work. There are, however, ways to preserve food that don't rely on electricity. You could seal the food in cans, provided you were able to sterilize enough empty containers and get your hands on a high-pressure canner. You could also use salt to preserve meats or dehydrate food by hanging it over the fire. There's one more power-related problem that we've been skirting around, and that is the over 400 nuclear power plants in the world. Much like other power plants, without human maintenance, their automated safety systems would start to fail, and this could lead to significant meltdowns. For an idea of just how devastating the effects of a nuclear incident like that would be, look no further than the Chernobyl disaster. Any area affected by a meltdown would likely end up flooded with harmful radioactive fallout, making it uninhabitable. Even decades after Chernobyl, the city of Pripyat, along with the surrounding area, still has radiation levels well above normal. Much like other abandoned cities now left to time, Pripyat's buildings have slowly crumbled, while nature has quietly reclaimed the land, creeping through empty streets and shattered windows. Subsisting on mainly the preserved food from supermarkets, you do your best to keep to as balanced of a diet as you can. You're not exactly a hunter, though you are embracing that primitive lifestyle, honing your skills with spears and bows. Guns and ammunition are not only limited but hard to come by. Your days consist of maintaining what fresh produce you're able to grow, and occasionally venturing out to hunt or forage for supplies. But there's another unforeseen danger lurking out there in the world, one that looms over you wherever you go: loneliness. Humans are, by our very nature, social animals. Even if you had enough food and water to last a lifetime, you would still be dealing with the elements on your own. That includes maintaining the integrity of your survival homestead, watching as the city's buildings decay, and constantly being aware of the lack of other people. The majority of living creatures you'd encounter would be wild animals that either see you as a threat or a snack. Like we mentioned earlier, books would offer little relief from the isolation. There would be no way to watch movies or view digital photos and videos to relive memories without electricity, and certainly no one around to share a conversation or even a hug with. Psychologically, there's a key difference between loneliness, isolation that is forced upon you, and aloneness, a conscious choice to spend time away from others. It might sound like splitting hairs, but the brain reacts in different ways to each condition. With no other humans left to interact with, you'd face the full psychological weight of true loneliness, including the deep distress that comes from realizing you are not just choosing to be alone, there is simply no way out of it. There's a reason that solitary confinement is employed as a severe punishment to incarcerated individuals, and why it's simultaneously considered a controversial, inhumane practice. Denying a person the ability to interact with other human beings is depriving them of a basic need, and it can risk inflicting serious harm on someone. One of the most alarming effects of this type of isolation is that it has been found to actually shrink the size of the hippocampus. This is the part of the brain related to memory, learning, and spatial awareness. The kind of isolation you're facing would likely keep your brain in a prolonged state of stress, and that has serious consequences. It can reduce the plasticity of your hippocampus, slow the formation of new neurons, and even impair the hippocampus's ability to function altogether. Studies on mice have shown just how damaging a lack of social interaction can be to cognitive ability. After just 1 month of complete isolation, about 20% fewer neurons were firing, a sharp drop that directly impacts brain function. And that means serious trouble for you, especially when it comes to retaining and recalling new information. That's going to be a major setback when survival depends on learning new skills constantly. On top of that, isolation similar to solitary confinement is known to ramp up activity in the brain's fear center, the amygdala. This will surely lead to persistent anxiety and disrupted sleep. Sure, wild animals and the looming threat of nuclear meltdowns are terrifying, but the scariest part of your new life might just be the knowledge that there is nobody else around. So what would life really be like as the last human on Earth? The simplest answer? Brutal. Physical survival would depend entirely on skill, routine, and resilience, but relying solely on those without any other human interaction wouldn't really be much of a life. Even the most solitude-loving among us need interaction. Take everyone else away, and the psychological toll becomes overwhelming. You might hold on to that hope that someone is still out there, but until then, you're left with the hardest truth imaginable. You are not just alone, you are the last. Being the last human on Earth would be bad. But what if your journey was just beginning? Watch why it would suck to live through the end of the universe to see how it all plays out, or click on this video instead.